Can you share a bit about your experience of diagnosis, the process, and how it was for you?
Well, when I got diagnosed with autism, I think my first words to react to it was like, "Is this lifelong?" I didn't really know because you believe autism is a disability, and in my eyes, it really isn't. It's just a different way your mind is formed, and how you think, how you react, how you feel is, dependent on autism. But it was really hard to process because I was kind of, it's kind of like a stigma autism. You think that people you see nonverbal, struggling with words, not knowing how to learn in class, you think that's autism and nothing else is. And when you get diagnosed with autism, it's difficult to know. For me, I never struggled with words. I never struggled with learning. It was just something that was part of me, and it's just something that happened, and I'm getting used to it, and it explains a lot.
A parent perspective of what the journey's been like to get to diagnosis, the biggest word would probably be frustrating, because when Paige was a toddler, an infant, we did try to get some help and tap into some resources. And again, we were told that you have to be stricter and really strong parenting is the answer. And so for us to get to that stage when Paige went from primary school to high school, and for the guidance counselor at the high school said pretty early on that they recommended that we get a diagnosis. And I said to the guidance counselor, a diagnosis, I'm sorry, but can you please tell me what you mean? And she said, oh, well, for autism. And I literally, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, what? Really? And because I was a bit like Paige, I thought of autism as the extreme case, and the nonverbal, really struggling individuals. I mean, Paige, she's very independent in so many ways that I thought, trust me, I was completely naive at the beginning of diagnosis. So I took the guidance officer's advice, and we took a few months to get a psychologist. We had a couple of hit and misses, because some psychologists don't relate to kids very well, and you really need to find a place that specializes in either preteen, teen, child, because if you go in and you get the adult experience for a teenager, that you're going to lose that teenager in a heartbeat. They're just not going to engage, which is what happened a couple of times. But we did find a great psychologist, and they came back with Asperger's when it was still kind of being called that a few years ago. I was stoked for Paige, to be honest. I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many cool people that have Asperger's. I didn't know that it was autism. I mean, I was literally this naive. I feel so embarrassed to admit it, but I'm happy to put it out there. Paige got, she had this assessment day with a psychologist that wasn't her usual psychologist, because they have to go in with a fresh lens to do their assessment. And we got the results fairly quickly, and basically got a printout, just a few pieces of paper, 6 pages about, your child has this and this is what it means. A bit of a timeline. I guess it was the guidance counselor recommending a diagnosis. So then we went to a psychologist. The psychologist, in the nicest way possible, said that I think Paige would benefit from having a psychiatrist, because the psychologist was liaising with the GP discussing medication for Paige's chronic depression. We would call it chronic depression because she did attempt suicide, and she was very, very closely watched medically. So again, another waiting list, which is very frustrating, but all I can recommend there is to be kind and persistent and never get aggressive, because I don't think the office manager would want to deal with you on a long-term basis. And it is a long-term relationship that you have, not only with the psychiatrist, but with the practice manager, and eventually to her very first psychiatrist appointment. And now Paige sees her psychiatrist every month, like clockwork, and has been for nearly 3 years, which is amazing. The psychiatrist, and most psychiatrists in Australia and psychologists, are part of the Medicare threshold. The appointments are about $500 for 50 minutes. And you think, that's so much money. But if you just do that for about 2 visits, you hit the threshold and then you get like $450 back. So from January to December, you've got the Medicare threshold. If you register for that, you do hit it really early on in the year. So it's not the financial strain that a lot of people are afraid that it is.
How did getting a diagnosis or diagnoses feel for you both and the rest of the family? Did it help?
Like, I'm happy it happened to me so young because it was easier to teach myself to not mask. Because when I was in year 6, the mask would slip, you know? Like, I'd have moments and I'd just start crying and freaking out, and I felt as though I didn't know who I was because I felt like I had multiple personalities for each interaction. You know, I had a mask for the teachers, I had a mask for friends, I had a mask for family, and it just felt like I lost myself in the process. But being diagnosed and being told you're masking, it helped me like kind of train that mask away. But I believe that's very dependent on being diagnosed young. I know for a fact that my diagnosis with autism rolled up everything to get my whole family diagnosed, or, you know, with the case of my dad, kind of self diagnosed. Because I had autism, I got diagnosed with autism. Dad read it and then he was like, I think I have autism.
That's when my husband and I were reading it that night, and he's like, this is me. Like, this is my childhood, how I struggled at the same age as Paige.
I got diagnosed with ADHD and then mum was like,
It was your psychiatrist that said, I think you need to see somebody yourself, as in to me. So
yeah. And then mum got diagnosed, and now recently my sister got diagnosed with ADHD. And like, you know, I think it's a bit of a shock to the whole family. I don't know how like everyone else feels, but it's interesting to see that like I guess I was the catalyst to show that everyone else, but it makes a lot of sense. And I just think that like if your child gets diagnosed, it's like really important to you to think and step back. Do I have a similar condition or the same condition to my child? Like, looking at it now, like our whole family is neurodivergent.
So my mum is just so shocked that my daughter, eldest daughter, and I have ADHD, and my sister looks like she has ADHD. And to say to my mum, who's 79, Mum, you have ADHD, I'm pretty sure. And she's like, well, what? I need to read about this. And she's done a bit of research and she's like, oh, this explains my life. And it's
And like autism was a great thing to understand how my mind worked, but it didn't explain the mood swings. It didn't explain the restlessness in a way. It didn't explain like, you know, I was irritable, I was sad, I was depressed, I was easy to like get mad, I was very explosive at times. And autism just didn't explain that. I was mad. I was really mad, and I was like talking to my psychologist, like, diagnose me with something, like give me something right now, because I don't know what's happening, but I need an answer because autism doesn't explain it all. And she was like, that's not how it works. But she did diagnose me with ADHD and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I think that PMDD is really important for young girls. If you do have that, especially, I went to a support group about PMDD and perimenopause, and a lot of them were actually on the spectrum. So I think that's also really important.
because it comes up in the puberty years really strongly, and also comes up in perimenopause quite strongly for neurodiverse people in particular. PMDD needs a lot more research.
PMDD definitely explained a lot, because a reason why I was so distraught all the time is because I felt like I was completely happy at times, and then the next moment I would be so mad, like so incredibly mad. And like PMDD definitely explained a good amount of that. But like even now, there's more questions that need to be answered.
The reaction was naivety and shock, and it felt really mixed emotions. I was really relieved to have a reason, and also to have some like things that I can go ahead and research. So I went and got all the books from the library. I was on all the websites, and I was doing webinars and listening to podcasts. So then I was just deep diving, and, you know, I'm saying to Paige, this is like a superpower that your brain works this way. And that was really not the right thing looking back. I was probably getting a couple of slices of the circle of the pie, not the whole circle. So I needed to wait a little bit before I started telling Paige she was superhuman to get all the information. And like, I'm still learning. And I think even the medical or profession is still learning. Actually, this is probably a really good point. I was deep diving into all this research on my own, and I kind of forgot to ask Paige what it was like to be autistic.
With that, I felt like you would just go into your own world of research and just do as much as you could and then report back to me like, oh, this is what it's like, Paige. This is what it's like to have autism.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. But it's just like, it was a bit confusing because like me, myself, I didn't really know what it was like, but I was like learning to understand that I was different because like my whole life I was told I was normal. So I thought everything going on, like the meltdowns, the freakouts, the like, the
sensory
sensory
overload.
overload, I thought that was just a normal thing humans had. And so I just didn't know what autism was because I thought this is how people are. Learning that I was different was hard to understand, but I did understand, but like doing research and then being like, oh, by the way, this is how autistic people are. Isn't that cool? And I'm like, oh, but I actually live with autism. I would know. But like, I didn't mind. It was just like, you just need to learn that like this is really important. You need to learn that every autism is different. Every child with autism will be different.